Okay, let's think about this. What was the last movie you actually saw in a movie theater?
Hmm.
Was it maybe a superhero movie, a sequel, something really big and loud?
Yeah.
Have you maybe stopped and thought, hang on, there were certain kinds of movies I used to see at the multiplex, and they just seem to have vanished. Have
Yeah.
you noticed that?
If you have, you're definitely not alone. I mean, what you're sensing, it's part of this huge transformation the movie business has been going through for years now.
Right.
It's really a story about, well, power shifting, tastes changing both audiences and corporations, and, new technology just turning everything upside down.
So that's our mission today, really. We're going to take a deep dive into your sources and try to figure out what the heck happened to Hollywood, where are things going, and honestly, is there any hope for cinema to maybe change course?
And these sources, they offer a really fascinating window into all this upheaval. They focus quite a bit on the story of one major studio, Sony Pictures. And through their experience, you can really see how these massive economic forces and these big industry trends reshaped, well, what you end up seeing on the screen.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start by setting the scene a bit.
Yeah.
When you think about Hollywood history, I mean, few places feel more iconic, right? More steeped in that legacy than the lot in Culver City, California.
Oh, yeah. That MGM lot.
Exactly. It's 102 years old, 44 acres, famously home to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer MGM. Now, Sony Pictures is there.
And that lot is just, it's dripping with history. The entrance have that giant rainbow arch, right? Reminds you of The Wizard of Oz.
Filmed right there.
Filmed right there. And you walk down their main street, it's like this faux downtown, buildings named after giants, Cary Grant, Frank Capra, Rita Hayworth, David Lean.
Wow.
These were the stars, the filmmakers who built the legacy of Columbia Pictures, which, Sony bought back in 1989.
It's this almost mythical place, isn't it? Full of reminders of Lawrence of Arabia and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the sources draw this really sharp contrast between that history and, well, today. Seeing stars like Will Smith or Seth Rogen walking around that same lot, seeing posters for Spider-Man or Breaking Bad or Skyfall, it makes you think, doesn't it? How Hollywood not that long ago was really driven by stars and original ideas.
And that's exactly where the big shift started happening. The sources talk about what they call the franchise film era.
Okay.
And it's described as almost like a return to the old studio system's power concentration, but with a key difference.
Which is?
Instead of studios owning the actors under contract, now they own the brands, the intellectual property things, Star Wars, X-Men, these massive things.
Right. So instead of being, Clark Gable tied to MGM, an actor today is hoping to get cast in the next Marvel movie or the next Star Wars thing, whoever owns it now.
Exactly. And studios like Warner Bros., Disney, Universal, they adapted really well to this. They started focusing on these huge, expensive, what they called event movies.
Right.
And these were designed really from the ground up for sequels, spin-offs, merchandise, the whole package.
Meanwhile, Sony, they were struggling a bit then, weren't they, in the late 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah, they were actually struggling financially. The sources mentioned they ranked like number 4 at the box office in 98.
Ooh.
And then dropped even lower to 6th or 7th from 99 to 2001. They had some pretty big flops, too. Remember that 1998 Godzilla?
Oh, yeah.
And A Knight's Tale in 2001.
Right, with the Heath Ledger. Fun movie, but maybe not a huge hit.
Didn't quite set the world on fire financially. But then came the turning point.
The turning point, not just for Sony, but you could argue for the whole industry, right? The first Spider-Man movie, 2002, how did that manage to completely flip Sony's fortunes?
Oh, it was massive. Just huge. That original Spider-Man trilogy, it was monumentally successful. The sources say, and it's probably true, that Sony could justifiably brag about being king of the superheroes at that moment.
The king of the superheroes.
Those first 3 films became, at that time, the most successful superhero pictures ever made. It completely changed their trajectory.
And there's this amazing backstory in the sources about how Sony even got the rights. It wasn't straightforward, was it?
Not at all. Apparently, the idea came up when Marvel was actually in bankruptcy in the late 90s.
Wow, bankruptcy.
Yeah. And Sony, driven by an exec named Yair Landau, actually teamed up with Hasbro at one point. They put together a $500 million offer to buy all of Marvel.
Get out. $500 million.
Yep. That deal fell through, but Landau kept at it. He used some valuable home video rights Sony already had as leverage to finally lock down the movie rights just for Spider-Man for Marvel. Involved guys like Ike Perlmutter and Avi Arad on the Marvel side. It was quite the negotiation.
And what about the casting? Yeah. Tobey Maguire. That felt a bit different at the time, didn't it?
It did, and sources point this out. Sam Raimi, the director, chose Maguire. He was respected, sure, but not like a huge A-list box office guarantee compared to maybe other superhero stars back then. And the sources highlight this as a sign, maybe subtle but significant, that the shift was happening. The character, the Spider-Man brand, was becoming the main draw, maybe even more than the star playing him.
But the game kept evolving, didn't it?
Yeah.
Fast. The sources talk about the next big thing after the franchise era,
Yeah.
the cinematic universe. Marvel Studios, by then owned by Disney, really pioneered this.
Right.
What was different about that?
Yeah, this was the next level, interconnected stories, not just one movie leading to its own sequel.
Right.
It was these big overarching narratives weaving through like 2 or 3 films every year, characters crossing over, storylines intersecting. You know, Iron Man leads to Thor, leads to Captain America. They all meet in the Avengers.
Ant-Man pops up in Captain America.
Exactly. Fights Spider-Man briefly. It's all meant to feel like one giant unfolding story. And Marvel Studios, under people like Perlmutter, Arad, and then Kevin Feige, they built this by being really loyal to the comics.
How so?
Like having the heroes actually interact in New York City where they lived in the comics, that kind of detail.
And the business thinking behind connecting all these movies was smart too, wasn't it?
Mm.
The sources mentioned it gave them sequel benefits without having to wait years for the same actors for their next solo movie.
That's exactly right. You could keep the momentum going with different characters. And believe it or not, the initial plan wasn't even really about making money on the movies themselves.
Seriously?
Yeah, the idea was basically break even on the films, make the real profit from toys and merchandise. Although, funnily enough, the sources say the Iron Man toys were actually hard to give away at first.
No way.
Yeah, nobody wanted them initially.
Which makes the success of Iron Man in 2008 even more surprising then. That opening weekend, nearly $100 million, was huge for the time.
Absolutely huge. It just validated their whole approach. And it wasn't just the money, it had this specific tone, right? Playful, witty.
Yeah, different from the Nolan Batman films, which were darker.
Exactly. It set the MCU tone. And that little Nick Fury scene after the credits, hinting at a bigger world, genius. That was key.
And the sources are clear. Marvel's success, Iron Man and what came after, it didn't just change things. It, quote, threw the entire movie industry on its heels. Studios were scrambling, Marvel became dominant, and original films started getting pushed further aside.
And this, specifically, as the sources put it, it stung Sony a lot. By 2016, movies from Marvel Studios had totally knocked Sony's Spider-Man off the top superhero pedestals.
Really?
Yeah, that original 2002 Spider-Man, which was #1, had fallen to #7 among the biggest superhero movies ever. 4 of the top 6 were now Marvel Studios films.
Ouch.
Big ouch. Amy Pascal, who was running Sony's movie division then, she had to admit pretty bluntly that Sony was, quote, being eaten by Marvel.
You can really track those struggles for Sony through the 2010s in the sources, even though they had big franchises like Bond, Men in Black, Spider-Man.
But the finances behind them were getting tougher. Take Skyfall, the Bond film from 2012. Massive gross, right?
Yep.
$1.1 billion worldwide, record for Bond then.
Huge number.
But the sources reveal the ultimate profit for Sony over the next decade was, wait for it, $57 million.
$57 million on $1.1 billion gross. That's tiny.
Shockingly small, yeah.
Yeah.
And the sources also show Spider-Man 3's profits were way down from the earlier ones. $159 million profit compared to $245 million for Spider-Man 2. That's a 35% drop.
So trying to make Spider-Man 4 must have been tricky then.
Became a real headache. Bringing back Maguire and Raimi, making it a big event movie. It was projected to cost over $200 million. The internal numbers showed Sony might only break even.
Wow.
And the sources say Sam Raimi just lost his passion for it after a bunch of difficult rewrites, and he eventually walked away.
Which led to what the sources call a truly disastrous summer for Sony in 2013. They didn't have a big franchise ready, so they took some big swings.
Yeah, expensive swings. After Earth with Will Smith, White House Down with Channing Tatum and Jamie Foxx.
I remember those.
And they weren't cheap. Each cost around $150 million to make. And the sources frame them as feeling like relics almost.
Relics, how so?
Compared to the stuff that was working that summer, Fast and Furious 6, Man of Steel, animated sequels like Monsters University, Despicable Me 2, branded properties. After Earth and White House Down just bombed, lost tens of millions each.
And didn't some activist investor make a stink about it?
Oh yeah, Dan Loeb. The sources say he gleefully compared them to infamous flops like Ishtar and Waterworld. That kind of stink, as the sources put it, really lingered around the studio.
Man. And the pain continued with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in 2014, right?
It did. Grossed $709 million. Sounds okay.
Yeah, seems like a lot.
But it was the lowest grossing Spidey film and the lowest grossing superhero movie that whole year. Missed internal targets. And maybe the biggest insult, it lost at the domestic box office the weekend after it opened to Neighbors.
The Seth Rogen comedy.
The low-budget Seth Rogen comedy, yeah. That had to hurt.
So where did that leave Sony, particularly Amy Pascal running the film side?
It really hammered home how much they were struggling. By late 2014, Pascal basically concluded she needed help with Spider-Man. She looked at different options, but the sources say she realized she might have to do something unthinkable.
Which was?
Let Marvel, the original creator, the licensor, take back creative control.
Whoa.
Yeah. The sources call it a humiliating creative defeat for Sony's team. And it definitely showed how much the power has shifted between Sony and Marvel.
And just to pile on,
Yeah.
late 2014 was also when the Sony hack happened, right after the interview came out.
Exactly. The interview, the R-rated Seth Rogen comedy about assassinating Kim Jong-un, already a financial disappointment.
Cost $41 million, made $11 million theatrically, something like that.
Right. Before they shifted the release strategy, then came the hack. Massive breach.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of embarrassing emails, documents leaked.
Including stuff about North Korea and the movie plot.
Oh, yeah. Really sensitive stuff. The U.S. government pointed the finger at North Korean-backed hackers, though the sources note it was never, 100% definitively resolved. But yeah, a total crisis moment.
It really paints a picture of a studio under siege during this massive industry shift. And speaking of shifts, this era also saw that fundamental change away from old-school movie star power, didn't it?
Absolutely. The sources make it crystal clear. Audience loyalty shifted decisively from the star to the brand, the franchise.
It's easy to forget, but think back to the 2000s. The sources list examples.
Yeah, about half the top 20 biggest movies each year were basically star vehicles.
Right. Castaway with Tom Hanks, #2 in 2000. Bruce Almighty, Jim Carrey, #5 in 2003. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Pitt and Jolie, #10 in 2005. Hancock, Will Smith, #4 in 2008. Sandra Bullock in The Blind Side, #9 in 2009.
Your name above the title meant massive box office.
Huge. But now?
Now, the sources say studios are just incredibly reluctant to build their business around original films or even star vehicles without a known brand attached. The sources have this great line: such films are rare as a joke in a Christopher Nolan film. And studios that tried to make, quote, too many original films for adults like Sony and Paramount, they really struggled financially in this climate.
Even Will Smith felt this, right? He made billions for Sony over the years, but the sources say he got passed over for Chris Pratt in Passengers.
Yeah, passed over for a younger star who was hot off a big franchise, Guardians of the Galaxy. A tough message for a superstar like Smith.
Adam Sandler is another key example here, isn't he? The decline of theatrical star power versus the rise of streaming.
Absolutely key. Sony passed on his project, The Ridiculous Six, a Western spoof. Apparently Warner Bros. Passed, too.
But then Netflix swooped in.
Big time.
Yeah.
Netflix used their data. They could see how incredibly popular Sandler's older movies were on their service. They went after him hard, signed him to this massive, multi-picture exclusive deal.
And Netflix thought it was successful.
Hugely successful, according to Netflix. And the sources make a great point. It let Sandler go where he was valued and, frankly, where his audience preferred watching him anyway at home.
Right. He didn't have to deal with studio execs who, the sources suggest, maybe looked down on his comedy a bit.
Exactly. He found his place.
This really brings up the question of what kinds of movies are getting squeezed out of theaters. The sources specifically mention mid-budget dramas.
Oh, yeah. The ones people say they want more of.
Right, the grown-up movies.
But they just don't reliably get people off the couch and into the cinema anymore. And with DVD sales tanking, that used to be the safety net.
So if they don't perform theatrically...
They can lose tens of millions.
Yeah.
Easily. There's no financial floor anymore. There's this quote in the sources. Tom Rothman apparently told Amy Pascal about the prospects for these films, and her reply was just, "It's fucked."
Wow. Blunt.
Pretty much sums up the risk profile for major studios trying to make those movies theatrically now.
It even got personal for Pascal, didn't it? The sources mention her struggle over the Steve Jobs movie.
Yeah, she was passionate about it, but the financial projections were just too grim for Sony. She had to let it go, called it the worst decision of her career. There was even that infamous email she sent while trying to save the deal. Apparently, she was literally in the mammogram machine.
Oh my gosh. Talk about pressure.
It really shows how the cold financial realities were hitting even personal creative decisions at the highest levels.
What's so fascinating is while the movie side was going through all this turmoil, another part of the media world was absolutely exploding. Television.
Oh, absolutely booming. The sources show that by the mid-2010s, TV was just flat out the more profitable business for most media conglomerates compared to film,
Higher margins.
significantly higher. The example given is HBO often earning more profit than the entire Warner Bros. Film studio, even on like half the revenue. HBO's profit margin was around 33%. Movies, typically less than 10%.
And studios make TV shows, even if they don't air on their own channels, right?
Right. Warner Bros. Makes hundreds of millions licensing The Big Bang Theory to CBS and TBS. Sony owns these massive cash cows like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy.
Billions over the years for those two.
Billions with a B. The sources confirm even when film and TV revenues were roughly equal at Sony around the mid-2010s, the profits from TV were substantially higher.
And the way we watch TV changed, too, fueling this.
Dramatically. We went from having to watch shows live, appointment viewing,
Right.
to DVD box sets and DVRs enabling binge watching. Shows like 24, The Wire. That encouraged cable networks, HBO, AMC, FX, to make more serialized, complex, really sophisticated shows. Sopranos, Mad Men, Breaking Bad.
And then Netflix basically made binge watching the default, didn't they? First with licensed shows, then with their own originals designed for it.
Exactly. The sources mention House of Cards getting greenlit because Netflix saw viewers who liked Kevin Spacey movies also liked David Fincher films in the original British series. They knew the audience was there to just devour it.
Breaking Bad is singled out as a prime example, too, right, from Sony TV.
A perfect example of TV's new power culturally and financially. It wasn't a huge ratings hit initially on AMC,
No, it grew over time.
but critically adored. Tons of buzz. And the sources estimate it became the second most profitable piece of entertainment content for Sony in the entire 21st century.
That can only do.
The original Spider-Man movie, Breaking Bad, generated over $400 million in profit for Sony.
Wow. More profit than almost all their other movies combined.
Pretty much. And that money came from everywhere. AMC fees, Netflix licensing, huge DVD and Blu-ray sales. The box sets sold like crazy during the final
I
season.
remember that.
And merchandise, too.
The sources also hint at some internal tension, maybe, between the incredibly successful TV side, led by someone like Steve Moscow at Sony, and the struggling film side under Pascal.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that the massive business success of TV didn't always translate into, let's say, equal status or recognition internally within that old Hollywood hierarchy, which was traditionally film-focused.
It wasn't just Sony either,
Yeah.
right?
No, the sources mention a Warner Bros. Example, where the head of TV, despite running the most profitable division, lost out on the CEO job to the head of home entertainment.
So, ultimately, this TV golden age, it pulled talent, attention, audiences, everything away from film, making it even harder for studios to justify making anything but the biggest tentpoles for theaters.
And right into this shifting landscape stepped these new players, armed with totally different business models influenced by this booming global market. Netflix, Amazon, they started funding films for reasons that had almost nothing to do with traditional box office.
Netflix's spending was just staggering, wasn't it? The sources mentioned something like $13 billion on content in 2018 alone.
Insane numbers. And that let them produce this huge volume of original films, maybe 80 in 2018.
Yeah.
Compare that to a traditional studio putting out, what, 20? Maybe fewer.
Big difference.
And crucially, they started working with big stars, acclaimed filmmakers across all sorts of genres. They deliberately mixed high volume with prestige plays, awards contenders like Roma.
And the goal wasn't opening weekend box office.
Nope. It was using movies to sell subscriptions,
Yep.
keep people signed up.
Amazon Studios took a slightly different tack initially, is that right? More indie art house focus.
Yeah, the sources describe them acquiring films like Manchester by the Sea out of Sundance, producing stuff with respected filmmakers. Their strategy was different. Use these films to attract and retain Amazon Prime subscribers.
Prime subscribers who buy other stuff on Amazon.
Exactly. They targeted a more upscale, educated demographic who are, as one exec kind of sheepishly put it, very good retail customers.
Huh. Interesting. And they learned about theatrical releases, too.
They did. Initially, they wanted quick streaming releases, but to attract the filmmakers they wanted, they realized they had to promise longer theatrical windows. They learned that a theatrical run, even a limited one, creates awareness and buzz that actually drives people to watch it later on Prime.
And then there's China. The sources make it clear how huge that market became.
Absolutely critical. It basically replaced the revenue stream Hollywood lost from declining DVD sales. For certain movies like Warcraft or the later Fast and Furious films, China's box office was even bigger than the U.S.
And that influenced what got made.
Definitely. The Chinese market showed a clear preference for big brands, visual effects, spectacle, so that reinforces the push towards those kinds of movies. But the sources also highlight the challenges.
Like,
Unpredictable censorship from state entities, rules changing constantly, and even accusations of box office manipulation where revenue for a Hollywood film might allegedly get shifted to a local Chinese movie. Happened with Terminator Genesis, apparently.
wow. Plus, there's more Chinese investment flowing into Hollywood now, too.
Yeah, funding parts of film slates at studios like Lionsgate, Universal. It's a complex relationship.
The sources also mention another interesting development, these studio satellite ventures. Former studio execs starting their own companies.
Right. Like Doug Belgrad, who spent 27 years at Sony. He and others like him started independent production companies, often with outside funding, like from private equity.
And their plans to make the movies the studios aren't making anymore.
Exactly. Those mid-budget films, the $30 to $60 million thrillers, comedies, dramas, family films, they often co-finance them with their old studios.
So they're adapting, too.
They have to. They're thinking like content executives now. The sources mentioned Belgrad looking at a book he bought the rights to while at Sony and thinking, today, this works better as a limited TV series, not a movie.
Huh. So the question is, can these ventures work? Can they prove there's still a real business in those kinds of films?
That's the big question the sources leave hanging. It's an attempt to fill that gap.
When you pull all these threads together, the sources really point to this fundamental, almost philosophical shift, don't they? For the big conglomerates, for the tech giants, film isn't necessarily seen as this unique art form anymore.
It's increasingly viewed as just another form of content that serves broader corporate goals. Selling subscriptions, driving e-commerce, selling theme park tickets, whatever it might be.
And that perspective fuels things like the battle over the theatrical window, right?
Yeah.
That traditional 90-day exclusive run in theaters.
Absolutely. Studios are constantly pushing for earlier home viewing, premium VOD, etc., to create new revenue streams, cater to how people watch now, while filmmakers like Christopher Nolan are fighting hard for the theatrical experience, calling it the only true platform for certain kinds of movies.
But the sources seem to suggest shorter windows, maybe cheaper home viewing options. That's probably inevitable now.
It feels that way. It might create new money, maybe
Yeah.
help those adult dramas find an audience at home that they can't find in theaters anymore, but it definitely changes the whole experience.
And you see the ripple effects on things like the Oscars, right? Struggling for relevance, declining ratings.
Yeah, they're often honoring these smaller, independent adult dramas that, frankly, fewer people have seen in a theater. And they're wrestling with how or even if they should recognize the huge blockbuster franchise films or movies made only for streaming.
Remember that whole Best Popular Film Oscar idea that crashed and burned?
Exactly. A total symptom of that struggle. How do you stay relevant when the definition of a successful or important film is changing so dramatically?
It really feels like the days when, say, Rain Man or Forrest Gump could win Best Picture and be one of the highest-grossing films of the year. That's just over.
Pretty much. Now,
Yeah.
you get Best Picture winners like The Shape of Water or Moonlight, fantastic films, but they just don't connect with audiences on that massive theatrical scale the way blockbusters do, or the way past winners sometimes did.
So the conclusion from your sources seems pretty stark then.
It is. The traditional theatrical movie business is narrowing, focusing mainly on these mega franchises. Meanwhile, the tech giants and the studios that have managed to adapt are dominating all these other forms of filmed content, funded by completely new business models. That era where diverse original films were the core business of major Hollywood studios, it's largely over.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've gone on quite a journey here in this deep dive. From those historic Hollywood lots, to the rise of the franchise, the cinematic universe, Sony's specific struggles, that crazy hack,
Yeah.
the fading power of the movie star, the absolute rise of television as a business.
And the arrival of these huge new players, Netflix, Amazon, the influence of global markets like China.
We've seen how the focus shifted really from stars to brands, how TV kind of stole Hollywood's thunder in many ways, the talent, the critical buzz, the audience time.
And how these tech companies and changing global dynamics are just redrawing the whole map of who makes movies and why they make them,
Yeah.
and this idea of film becoming just content.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe something provocative for you to chew on. Given all these fundamental shifts in who makes movies, why they make them, and ultimately how you watch them, what does that actually mean for the kinds of stories that get told?
Yeah, I mean, will this relentless drive for predictable profits, for endless franchises, will it leave enough oxygen for the unexpected, the challenging, the truly original films that, define past eras of cinema?
And maybe the bigger question is, where will you find those kinds of stories in the future?
It's definitely a whole new world for movies out there. And the final act, still very much being written.